Hello everyone, I'm back today for another video. Today's video I'm going to be talking about who I believe the church is and what the implications of that are for us, because many of us were raised in the church that we grew up in, and then we came to realize how far off the church that we grew up in was. And so that led us on a journey to try to discover who the true church is. Many of us going on this journey have sought out the Messianic movement to try to reach Torah observance. And I believe this is a good thing for those trying to find the truth. However, I think many in the Messianic movement have been misled into basically the idea of throwing the baby out with the bathwater type of thing. So, to elaborate on this idea, first I want to talk about how it was with Israel, because I believe the best way to know what it's like in the New Testament times is to look back of how it was in the Old Testament times. And I think the basic way it was in the Old Testament times is the basic way it is in the New Testament times. So when we look at how it was in the Old Testament, the Israel was the holy nation, and Israel had a holy priesthood. However, throughout the history of Israel, we know that Israel fell away into major sin. We know that many of the kings were very wicked kings, especially the Israelite kings, but even some of the later Judah kings of the kingdom of Judah, they fell into major sin. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls have a document called Fragments of Testament of Levi, and the Greek version of the Testament of Levi, it's included in the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs. And like I've mentioned in other videos, the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs is a shortened version of a longer text that once existed in the Hebrew form. And the Dead Sea Scrolls represents fragments of that longer form. But in the shorter form of the Testament of Levi, it actually gives a prophecy from Levi of the high priests, the high priesthoods throughout the Jubilees. It prophesies of 10 Jubilees of priests, and it describes how each priest is, how they measure up to the Torah, how they measure up to righteousness. The initial high priests, the high priesthoods, are classified as righteous and holy and obedient. But as the later high priesthoods come, we are told in the Testament of Levi that those priesthoods were corrupt and false, and they started getting into major sin. And what's interesting is around the time of the Maccabees, in the Testament of Levi, it prophesies of that, and it basically indicates that the Maccabees was a temporary short-term revival of a more righteous priesthood. But it didn't last long, and shortly after that, the high priesthood became completely lost into illegitimacy. So the Testament of Levi actually says that the high priesthood stopped being legitimate shortly after the rise of the Maccabees. And then, as we know, in the New Testament times, the Sadducees had control of the high priesthood, and they did not have the legitimate line of Levi. They were installing priests who were not authentically ordained from the Levitical line, the line of Aaron. And so that is when the high priesthood was considered illegitimate. So you take this principle of how just because Israel is in sin doesn't mean that they lost their authority or they had lost their priesthood. It actually took more than just being sinful to lose the priesthood. They lost the priesthood because the first of it is because they stopped preserving the authentic line of Aaron, And then the second reason is, according to the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, it was because of what they did to the Messiah. What they were going to do to the Messiah led to the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Israelites, the second exile. And you know how the temple veil was torn? Well, the Testament of Levi prophesies that it would be torn because of the blood that was shed of the innocent, of the Messiah. So the veil being torn, many Christians believe that is an indication that is a rejection of the Levitical priesthood. That's a rejection of the sacrifices in the temple, and the New Testament is put in its place. But that's not the correct understanding. The correct understanding is that their priesthood was illegitimate because they had corrupted it so much and abominated it so much. So he rejected their priesthood, but did not reject the law of Moses. For the Messiah said in the Gospel of Matthew that no part of it would fall away until all is fulfilled. And all has not been fulfilled yet. So the law is still in place, and the sacrifices are still important, and the Levitical priesthood is important as well. So now that was the Old Testament, and hold on. Okay. That was the Old Testament times. Now, New Testament times. How does it apply to the New Testament? Well, I have seen in some of the extra writings of the apostles, the Apocrypha books of the apostles, they give extra laws, extra specifications of how to keep the law in the context of the Messiah. And many of the laws are a repetition of the laws of the Old Testament, of the law of Moses. There are so many examples of them reinstating those same laws. Like in some of the books, it actually says that it's a sin to eat unclean animals, it's a sin to be impure and unclean. Hey guys, thanks for joining. And yeah, so it has a lot of interesting repetitions of the laws of the law of Moses. But if you just stuck with the regular New Testament, you wouldn't know. Because many of the Christians say, well, if it was still required, they say, Jesus would have commanded it again in the New Testament. But as we know, not everything that he said is in the New Testament. And it is these other writings which give the full story, the full scope of what the Messiah requires of us. The New Testament actually refers to something called the law of Christ, the law of Messiah, and it doesn't really go into much detail of that. But here's the thing. If the law of Messiah is the same as the law of Moses, there would be no reason to distinguish between the two. And you know how the apostles, they interpret when Moses said a prophet like Moses will come. They interpret that as a reference to the Messiah. And so if the Messiah is a prophet like Moses, what does that mean? Well, not every prophet is a prophet like Moses. According to Deuteronomy, the very last chapter, ever since Joshua died, there has not been a prophet like Moses. So if we look, what is a prophet like Moses? A prophet like Moses is a lawgiver. A prophet with so much authority, he has authority to give laws. But that wouldn't matter if no laws were going to be added. The fact that a lawgiver would give laws implies that more laws could be given. And according to Jubilees, we see in Jubilees that the Torah was not all in place at the very beginning for Adam. It was gradual. New laws came into play at various times. Like Jubilees tells us how each of the festivals originated. The Feast of Weeks originated with Noah. The Feast of Unleavened Bread originated with Abraham. The Feast of Tabernacles originated with Abraham. Day of Atonement originated with Jacob. And the 8th day after the Tabernacles also originated with Jacob. And Passover originated with Moses. So it gives a history, Jubilees, of when the different commandments originated for us to start keeping. that is indicated that laws can be introduced over time when they're needed based on the situation. Because, for example, in the Old Testament times, we were not allowed. Prior to the flood, you were not allowed to eat any animals. But after the flood, there seems to have been a change where you can eat animals, but only clean animals. And likewise, prior to the time of Moses, there was nothing forbidden in the laws or natural morality of siblings marrying and having kids, or uncles and aunts and their nephews or nieces. There was no sin in them reproducing. But by the time of Moses came around, God revealed that it was now no longer acceptable to do it. And I believe that's because the DNA weakened over time, so that now it was no longer safe for people that close to marry and have children. So if that's the case, then that means new laws can be added based on the change of circumstances. So we have so much technology today. It's very confusing. What are we supposed to do? Many times it's unclear. How do we keep Sabbath in the context of all these technology? Well, when the law was given to Moses, it wasn't given with all this technology. So new laws could be given to tell us, okay, well, with all this technology in place, you guys need new laws to help you how to properly live. So there's also other indications in Scripture of laws being able to be added. But anyways, all that to say, there is a new law of the Messiah according to these other writings, according to the apostles. So question, if it was because DNA weakened, why was it given only to Israel and not the whole humanity? Well, that's a good question. I think that Israel was supposed to be a light unto the nations. So Israel was given the command, whereas the other nations, they were not righteous. And a requirement, I believe, for God to reveal himself to people, he can only reveal himself to those who are righteous. And not most of Israel was unrighteous, but there were a few select righteous people that he revealed himself to. So because the nations were so evil, and they were not truly seeking him, he did not reveal himself to any of those nations. But he was able to reveal himself to Israel. And then the hope was that Israel would teach the nations and guide them into righteousness. That would be my take on it. Hold on a second. There was another comment here. Hebrews says it is not by Aaron, even as the high priest prophesied one man should die that the nation survive, so today we see he made the perfect sacrifice, perfectly fulfilling the law in Christ. So I think the gospel says even as one man should die that the nation survive. The Gospel of John. I don't think that's in Hebrews. But Hebrews does talk about the priesthood, the Levitical priesthood versus the Melchizedek priesthood. But I believe there is strong reason to conclude that the Levitical priesthood is still in place. It's going to return. Book of Enoch prophesies of the third temple in righteousness. There's one book of the New Testament apostles, Gospel and Revelation. Sorry guys, I got cut off again. There's a writing called the Gospel and Revelation of the Apostles, and that writing has a prophecy of the temple, of the third temple. Also, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter, has a prophecy of the third temple as well, and all these are prophecies of it being built in righteousness. So there's also the prophecies of Jeremiah, which says the Levitical priesthood will not go away as long as the sun and moon are still here. It will still be in place. The covenant with Levi will still be in place. But so there's other prophecies of millennial kingdom animal sacrifices. You can do some research on that. There are some compelling prophecies of animal sacrifices being commanded in the millennial reign, the 1,000 years. So if that is the case, that seems an indication that the laws are still in place. Now, So there's the passage, nation of kings and priests. So I believe this is a nice transition into what the main point of this video is, and that is, who is the church in the context of the New Testament. So it is my understanding, based on the apostles' writings, the extra books, it is not every New Testament, it is not every baptized believer who is a priest and king. It is a nation of, the church is basically like a nation. It's a nation of all nations together. People are called out from the Gentiles, just like Israel, and a nation is formed. The church is formed. The Ethiopian Bible has these extra books. There's the Ethiopic Didascalia, the Ethiopic Synodos, the Ethiopic Books of Covenant, and the Ethiopic Book of Clement. They don't only exist in Ethiopian. There's other manuscripts in other languages, but it's only included in the Ethiopian Bible. But the Ethiopian Bible also includes the Book of Jubilees and Book of Enoch, which the Dead Sea Scrolls corroborate, and they're the only church that has it as part of the Bible. So I think it's important to look to these extra books in the Ethiopian Bible, in the New Testament. And these Ethiopian books, New Testament, they teach the law of Moses, observance. They teach really holy righteousness. So I think it's worth taking a look into. And there's so many similarities with the Essenes and Dead Sea Scrolls. I think it couldn't just be made up. There's no way they could make up these similarities to try to trick us into thinking the early believers were the Essenes. So now I'm getting close to my break ending. I have about 7 minutes, so I'm going to try to be quick with this. Basically, is my understanding that the Messiah made the church in the beginning, and he appointed bishops, and that each region was to have a patriarch. Okay, it goes into detail. Okay, so it goes into detail of what I'm about to say in the extra books in the Ethiopian Bible. It basically says that there's a patriarch over each region of the church. So when you look at through history, there's something called apostolic succession. The idea is very similar to the Levitical succession, where you had to be descended from the line of Levi. In the same way, apostolic succession is you have to be descended from the true line of the apostles, the ordination process. So each church region had a patriarch in which the churches were under their authority. The Church of Rome the patriarch of Rome had the churches under their authority. The Church of Alexandria in Egypt had the churches under their authority, etc. Each church region had their own patriarch. So, now when those leaders decided, in their opinion, that people were heretics, priests were heretics, they had the authority to forcibly remove the priest from their leadership authority. So they could make any priest step down who was under their jurisdiction. So the Catholics, they declared various groups heretics. Whether they were or not, it doesn't matter. They had the authority because they had the patriarch over the whole region. Those under their authority, they could reject and deny their ordination. They could undo their ordination. If those people who were removed from their office continued to serve in their priesthood, they were now an illegitimate line, and they were heretics, considered heretics because they were rejected from their ordination. When the Oriental Orthodox churches split away from the Roman Catholic Church did not have authority over all those other churches, because the Patriarch of Rome only had authority over the Roman churches. So even though they might have decided that they were heretics, they didn't have the jurisdiction to remove their priesthood. So the apostolic succession was preserved in the Oriental churches. It was also preserved in the Catholic churches. Then around 1054 AD, I think, the Eastern Orthodox broke away. They too were not under the jurisdiction of the Catholic Church. And so even though they condemned each other, they didn't have authority to remove each other's priesthoods. So the apostolic succession was preserved in both groups. But when you go to the Protestant Reformation, I have to do more study on this, but it seems like most Protestant churches, first of all, do not claim apostolic succession, and the ones that do, it's dubious and of questionable origins. And so it is my understanding that for the most part, every Protestant group has no legitimacy. The Protestant churches are not valid, whereas the true church is every other church that actually preserves apostolic succession. So if you're looking for the true church, I believe it is any church that has true apostolic succession that can be corroborated and verified by historical evidence. But with that said, even though they have the apostolic succession, they are corrupt to the core, many of these churches. I believe the Ethiopian Orthodox is the only one that is not corrupt, horribly corrupt. But it has problems, it has falsehoods. I believe the Oriental Orthodox are the purest churches. And I am looking into visiting the Coptic Orthodox Church. They're the closest church to the Ethiopian Orthodox, but there are so few Ethiopian Orthodox churches in America and most places in the world that you kind of have to try to find other churches. I believe it's important to go to church, find the true church, and join the true church. I wish I had more time to elaborate on this. I might make another video later this week because I'm kind of being cut off now. My break's about done. But basically, I believe we are called to join the true church. We are called to join a church of apostolic succession. But we are also not to fellowship with those who are unclean. And most of the apostolic succession churches are unclean. So if you've been baptized in the Roman Catholic Church, I believe your baptism is authentic. But I believe you shouldn't keep going to that church because they are unholy. The same thing with the Eastern Orthodox Church. I think the only churches we should really be fellowshipping with and trying to look into their church services are the Oriental Orthodox. And if you can, Ethiopian Orthodox. But it's so hard to find them. I would suggest Coptic Orthodox. And then the problem is you're never going to find a perfect church. So you have to do with what you're able to do. But I would say only Oriental Orthodox churches. But yeah, like I said, I'm really close to the end of my break. I don't want to be late. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have more questions, please leave it in comment of this video, and I will try to address it in future videos. Sorry this was rushed, and this video doesn't do justice to what I was trying to share with you guys. Shalom, God bless you guys, have a great week, and perhaps tomorrow or the next day, Thursday, I might do another video. Alright guys, peace.